Okay, wonderful. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SEADL workshop or the Southeast Asian Digital Library workshop. Just some notes before I introduce our speaker. We will have some time for Q&A after the lecture, so please hold your questions until the end, or you can feel free to write them in the chat. And without further ado, I will introduce our speaker. So we're joined today by Miss Emily Zinger, who is the Southeast Asia Digital Librarian at Cornell University and has held this role since 2020. Ms. Zinger graduated with her master's degree in information studies from McGill University. And while at McGill, she worked for the university's Rare Books and Special Collections Library as a metadata manager for 2 digital humanities research projects. She has previously worked as the junior editor of the Dewey Decimal Classification at the Library of Congress. Ms. Zinger received her bachelor's degree from the College of William and Mary, and she is also on the editorial board of the Journal of Critical Digital Librarianship. We are so excited to have her. Please help me in welcoming Ms. Emily Zinger. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Kylie. So hi everyone, my name's Emily, and today I'm here at CIASI to talk to you about digital archives, how you can use them for your language learning purposes, and how you can actually find them and then understand what you're looking at when you do find them. Just a quick review of our topics for today. We'll start with some definitions, talk about why these resources should be interesting to you, how to find them, how to use them when you do find them, as I said. And then that will include a talk about metadata, what that means, how you can use it to your research advantage. And I'll end on a brief note of copyright. So I've left time for your questions at the end. So again, please do be thinking about that as we move through this content. A little bit more about my own experience. So I'm project manager for SEADL. And I want to be clear that I'm not a Southeast Asianist. So as Kylie mentioned, my degree is in information studies. And I don't speak the languages that you're learning here at CIASI, but my expertise really comes in on how to manage and create and share these digitized resources. My office is at Cornell, but I actually serve over a dozen other institutions who all work together to cooperatively manage this digital library, of which University of Wisconsin-Madison is one. So let's start at the very beginning. What is a digital archive? We use this to describe a repository that houses digital versions of the kinds of rare or primary source materials that you can find in a physical archive. There are 2 kinds of materials you might encounter here. The first, and probably the most obvious or what you're familiar with, is digitized items. So these are scans or photographs of physical things, right? But a digital archive actually has the flexibility to go beyond this single modality. So you can also find here what we call born digital items. These are things that have never existed in a physical form at all. So here we're talking oral histories, digital art, sometimes websites, right? Some kinds of photos and videos, items that do not have a physical version sitting anywhere on a shelf. And when conducting your research or looking for educational materials, you want to use a digital archive rather than Google Images or other sources you find loose on the internet, because these materials, they are trustworthy and they're contextualized. So librarians, archivists, and other experts have dedicated a great deal of time and resources to creating these high quality items that are hosted next to other useful sources, all of which are described with the relevant information to help you understand what you're actually looking at. So here's an example. This is from Wisconsin-Madison's digital collections. So on the left, you see high resolution images of photographs of Laos. And then on the right, there's some descriptions and information about those photographs, like their titles, photographer, date of capture. If we were to keep scrolling, we'd find hundreds of similar photographs, creating this really wonderful opportunity for browsing and spontaneous discovery. And if you clicked on one of those images, you'd find even more of that contextualizing information to help you understand what you're seeing. Now, I'm about to say the most important thing I'm going to say this whole lecture. So if you walk away at the end of this session remembering only one thing, let it be this: not everything is online. I know this is actually a really common misunderstanding. It feels like these days our whole lives are online, but that's not true for archives. The majority of collections are not digitized, may not even have a trace of their existence on the internet. So using digital archives is an important process, an important part of the research and learning process. It's a great way for instantaneous global access, but don't forget that for every collection you find online that's interesting to you, there are dozens of others that have not yet been scanned or digitized. So start at digital archives, please. That's why I'm here, right? To encourage you to use these resources. But don't let that be the end of your educational journey. Visit a physical archives and see what else you can find that hasn't yet been put online. But why use digital archives for language learning? Well, I find that primary sources are almost always, by definition, unique, and they tend to be incredibly dynamic and engaging in a classroom or learning environment. They offer real-life examples of a language in use. This can be particularly helpful as a means of broadening your exposure to practical vocabulary. And primary sources can also help you hone in on subject-specific resources. So if you're here at CIASE studying a language to enable future research on a certain topic, these archival resources can help you focus your language education on that topic so that you're really getting a look at the exact vocabulary, the specific use cases, the way people, native speakers, talk about what you're going to be researching in the future. Let's run through some examples of what I'm talking about. So all of these are taken from SEADL, but this is just one example of many things that are out there. So television shows, these are a great way to immerse yourself in a language. On SEADL, we have this really fun collection of shows in Indonesian from a local channel in Bandung from around the early 2000s. So these include talk shows, news reports, soap operas. Pictured here on the screen is a show called Republik Mimpi. This was the Indonesian take on The Daily Show. So I know that's a bit of an older show at this point. I don't know if I'm dating myself with that, but it's just really, really fun things. My personal favorite from this collection is a show called Jalan Jalan Jajan, a local travel show. Also movies. So hopefully as of next semester, we should also start uploading to SEADL a collection of movies from the Thai Film Archive. So this includes cartoons, also a Cold War spy thriller pictured here. So these are especially exciting because many of these films never premiered in theaters, making their publication on SEADL the first time they will ever be available for viewing. So if you're learning Thai, I apologize. These are not available right now, but please do stay tuned for these movies. Also in Indonesian, we have this collection of interviews with prominent Indonesian authors, poets, and playwrights that really give you a look behind the biographies of some of Indonesia's most famous and noteworthy writers. Oral histories are especially useful because I find that they are often paired with subtitles or a transcript of the conversation taking place, sometimes even translations, that will help you, better situate yourself in the language as you're listening to it. So this image is from a collection of oral histories in SEADL that we have in Khmer. So here, anthropologists interviewed elders who experienced Cambodia's struggle for independence from France in the 40s and 50s through the terror of the Khmer Rouge, and then the work to restore the country later in the 80s and 90s. These kinds of individual experiences, they're often not always present in the more traditional academic literature. So access to oral histories I find to be especially valuable, right? For getting these real person, very intimate knowledge. And I'll note that these videos in particular do have English subtitles. But videos aren't the only creative way to immerse yourself in a language. On SEADL, we have a collection, a small collection, but collection nonetheless, of comic books and posters in Thai. So these in particular were created as anti-communist propaganda, almost certainly funded by the United States Information Service. So comic books, but also folk tales like this collection that we have in Malay, children's literature, right? These kinds of textual items, especially those accompanied with illustrations, contextualizing pictures, they're really great for reading acquisition in new languages and new scripts as well. The last item I'm going to mention here, seek out magazines, newspapers, other popular reading materials to practice your reading and translation. So this cover is from a 1998 edition of the Fine Arts magazine of Hanoi in Vietnamese. And you can just see from the variety of materials that I've shared here. And again, this is just a slice, right? This is just from SEADL. There are many digital archives out there. There's just a wealth of useful archival material online that can help you learn Southeast Asian languages. And I think I've already like showed my enthusiasm, but to be frank, I think they're really cool. Learning a language is an intensive process. I'm sure you're all familiar with that by now. Primary sources can add just an additional dose of fun and variety to that experience, in addition to some of the more scholarly benefits of, subject expertise like we've discussed already. So we've established these are useful, but how do you find them? The best way to find digital archives is to understand that these collections are distributed. They're spread out between the different universities and libraries and museums that have all individually taken the time to create them. And that can actually make it really difficult to find everything online that might prove useful to you on one topic. Even at Cornell, we have multiple collections, all in different places across the internet. And they're not always going to appear immediately in Google results. They might be too buried within an institutional website to pop up on that first page. So we call this digital siloing. So these collections, they're all trapped in their own websites, and they're not necessarily connected with similar collections. So I've got an example here. Say you're interested in historic photographs of Indonesia. So in Cornell Digital Collections, we have a photo album of Sumatra. And at University of Hawaii Manoa, they also have some slides of West Papua in their image collections. And then Harvard also has a handful of these black and white slides of Java in their digital collection. So you can imagine a researcher interested in one photograph might also be interested in the others, but it's very difficult to find them all if you don't know that they exist in the first place. But that's why I am here today. I have some tips and tricks to help you with that detective work. So if you're starting your search in Google, and that's not actually necessarily a bad place to start, add some strategic keywords to your search. So phrases like digital archive, digital collection, digital library, these are the words that we librarians use to point out that digital archival material on the web. And I know that sounds so simple, like why am I just saying Google digital library when you're looking for digital libraries? But it's a really powerful strategy to help you sift out all of the other material that is related to your topic on the web, but isn't actually the specific category of resource. You should also look for subject-specific LibGuides. So these are lists of resources created by librarians, usually on a given subject or topic. So there is no comprehensive list of the digital libraries that are out there, but archivists and librarians have started that work in these LibGuides. They often will have a category related to digital collections, and it can give you a place to start. So again, think of your strategic Google keywords: LibGuide, library guide, research guide, resource guide. Adding those kinds of phrases onto your subject keyword can really help you find what you're looking for that other folks have already started to list. There are also portals out there that aggregate digital material for you. So I help manage SEADL, which works with archives around the United States and Southeast Asia to bring together digital materials from and about Southeast Asia all into one discovery platform. But there are a few other portals that I want to point out that do that aggregation work on a much, much greater scale. So the first is Digital Public Library of America, dp.la, very easy URL to remember. It pulls together digital items from hundreds of institutions across the US, and it's a really great way to skip that first step of searching for digital collections and just to go straight to the relevant items. So let's look at an example here. I just went to all of DPLA's collections and then I limited by Thai. And you can see they have over 2,500 relevant results of materials in Thai. So on the left, you can see these filters that will help you hone in on what exactly you want to find. So maybe you're looking for videos in Thai or books in Thai. This is how you can get there. And if you click on contributing institution and open up that filter, you can see a list of every institution that has uploaded an item in Thai to DPLA. And some of these might seem expected. You've got a lot of institutions, universities there at the top that specialize in Southeast Asian studies. But you also have maybe some things that are unexpected, like the National Archives or the New York Public Library. You might not think of to look for materials to help you with your language learning. Now on those individual items, if you click View Full Item, it will pop you up to the original digital archive that contributed whatever you're looking at. So here you can see this is the autobiography of Helen Keller, translated into Thai from the American Printing House for the Blind. This would not have been my go-to, right, for first looking for materials in Thai. But thanks to DPLA, we have found this open access copy in their digital collection. So I highly encourage you to get on their website and explore and see what unexpected materials you can find that might be interesting and useful to you. There are also smaller aggregators, often at a state level. So this is Calisphere. It's an aggregator for institutions in the state of California. Find that it's especially strong on Southeast Asian materials. So we know these materials are important. We know how to find them. What do we do when we get there? So an important part of successfully using digital archives is understanding how these items are described. Each item in a digital archive is accompanied by metadata, or data about data. This includes information such as an item's creator, date of creation, associated place, topics, more, right? So that information that we saw on the left side of DPLA, all those filterable categories. And this is information created by librarians to make these items discoverable and understandable online. So I find it useful to think of metadata as a word bank. When you type a word into a digital archive search bar, you're searching that metadata. And if your search term doesn't match the metadata used to describe an item, it will not show up in your results, even if it's relevant to your topic. So let's use this photograph on the slide as an example. So say you're interested in foodways. If you were to get on SEADL and search food or eating or dinner, you wouldn't find this photograph because those words aren't in the metadata record. The title of the photograph is Meal at House 22Y. So if you searched meal, you're in luck, you're going to find it, but not using the synonyms, right? So it's really critical to your success in searching that you know how these records are structured and described. So let's look at another example. This is a Vietnamese textbook on zoology from 1920, from a collection that we have on early Southeast Asian publications. And then this is the metadata record that accompanies that photograph. So sorting through this information, you can see we've got the title in 3 languages, the author's name, some related topics, the size of the physical book, right? So when you're viewing digital items, sometimes it can feel like a really disconnected experience from the actual item. So we put the dimensions in there. And then some information about how to find the physical copy at the British Library. We partnered with them on this collection. So when beginning to use a digital archive, I always find it useful to get a lay of the land. Choose one item, any item, and explore its metadata. What fields does the repository use to describe the items? So think about that zoology book we just looked at. It was published in Hong Kong. I know that from looking at the cover and the publication page, but place of publication is not a field recorded in the metadata. So if we searched Hong Kong, we would not find that book, even though we know right here that it exists. If you're searching for materials in other languages, right, which is the whole point of this session today, how are those languages recorded? Are they in translation? Are they in the original script? Do the records include a transliteration? And if yes, can you tell what standard was used to create that transliteration? What kinds of subject terms does the archive use, and how granular or how detailed is that information? Say you want to find oral histories from people who lived in a specific city, but the digital archive you're searching in only records geographic information at the country level. Once again, your search might miss items that exist and are useful to you. So if you have a better sense of the descriptive practices from the get-go, you'll be better able to choose search terms that will match the metadata in the archive, and you'll actually be able to pull up the items they have that match your topic. So I want to talk more about searching for materials that are in languages with non-Latin scripts. So not all library and archival items in different languages actually include the original scripts in their metadata records. This is for a few reasons, one of which is that when the field of librarianship first started creating these records decades ago, some computer systems, they couldn't actually process different scripts. And so the Library of Congress developed this system of transliterating different scripts into the Latin alphabet. Today, librarians often have to process materials in languages that they don't read. And so we still use these systems to this day to help overcome that barrier. So on the screen here, what you're looking at is part of the Burmese system. Many records still use these transliteration systems, as I said. So understanding how to navigate them can be really vital in finding materials in Southeast Asian languages, right? So you can see here for each character in Burmese, there is a letter or combination of letters and diacritics in the Latin alphabet to stand in for that Burmese letter, right? But this is not always straightforward, nor is it intuitive. So I've got some tips to help search for transliterated terms. All of the examples here come from the Cornell Library Catalog, but these strategies should generally work across many different library catalogs and digital archives as well. So on the screen right now, you're looking at the transliterated version of the word English in Khmer. And each of these 5 versions was pulled from a different record in Cornell's catalog. So a combination of human error and changing standards over decades has resulted in these slight differences in transliterations. So when you're searching, think of possible spelling mistakes and then search each of those variations. The same thing goes for spacing within phrases. So many scripts in Southeast Asian languages don't put spaces between individual words. But then when librarians work with transliteration, they don't know where to put those spaces in the transliteration terms. And so you often will find differences and variations. So on the screen here, it's an example of 2 records in Thai, and the same word is spaced differently in each record. So just like your spelling mistakes, try different spacings to find all the relevant items that are out there. Library of Congress transliteration systems don't always make sense to folks like you who are familiar with a given language because they're not the same systems that native speakers use. These systems were created by librarians for librarians to serve a specific purpose. And so they can be really tricky to learn if you already are familiar with the language. So rather than trying to master that system for yourself, there are some ways that you can have the catalog actually do that work for you. So one is to limit your search to your target language, but then actually search for the term in English. So here's a search that I conducted. It is limited to Thai, but I searched the English term history. And then you can find in your results a record that has both the English term and the corresponding transliterated term. And if you speak the language or read the language, you should be able to recognize it, even though it won't be exactly the same, because it should, it should sound like an approximation of the word that you're looking for. Then just search again using that transliterated term that the catalog provided you with. And you're going to have a list of results that all use that term in their metadata. You can use a similar strategy with a physical book. So if you have a book in your target language and the keyword that you want is in the title, use the book's call number to search for its record. And then in its record, you can find that transliterated term and again, search it into the future. So as you find these translations, save them in a spreadsheet, right? I know everything that I just said is a little complicated and a little confusing, and you don't want to have to do that each time you're looking for a resource. So if you have a spreadsheet of these terms that you've had success with in the past, you can easily copy and paste them into future searches. And of course, ask a librarian who specializes in your language. There is a whole group of Southeast Asia studies librarians across the US who speak Southeast Asian languages and have spent their careers searching for and working with books that have transliterated terms in their records. And part of our jobs as librarians is to answer questions like these. So I often have students say, I was having trouble with this, but I didn't want to bother you. It's not a bother. It is in our job description. It's never an imposition for you to come and ask a librarian for help. It is important to recognize, however, that metadata, particularly metadata used to describe non-Western materials, can be biased. The descriptive standards that librarians use were often created for Western items and subjects. And this means that they don't always appropriately reflect the diversity of subjects present in archival collections from other regions and cultures. Speaking for the field as librarians, we try to approach this work with cultural humility, but we don't always have subject knowledge expertise regarding the items that we have to describe. We also try to pair with community members and scholars like yourselves who do have that cultural knowledge or that subject expertise. But this is important for you all as researchers and language learners to keep in mind when you're conducting searches on Southeast Asian subjects and Southeast Asian languages. Now we're just going to cover one last topic in this lecture before we move on to any questions you may have, and that's copyright. So of course you are allowed to use digital archival material in your assignments and research. That's what it's all there for. But if you're going to publish that research, if you're going to repost something from an archive online, if you're going to share something with a larger class of students, especially if you're sharing it online, you should always consider copyright. So as the digital librarian, this is a huge part of my job. What can we legally share online? How do we properly credit the original owners of our collections? And I've put together a starting checklist that you should run through before you share a copy of anything publicly. So first, is there copyright information in the metadata? Just because an archive has already digitized an item and published it online, that does not actually mean that you are allowed to do the same. I know it's not intuitive, but often archives will obtain licenses to digitize and publish a single copy of an item, but the license does not extend to your reuse of that item. So look in the metadata record for words like copyright, reuse, or ownership. And if there is such a field, it will hopefully include more information to help direct your decision-making process. There are also some items that are no longer subject to copyright and are therefore free for you to use and share and adapt. And these are items in the public domain, which as of January this year, that is any item published in or before 1927. So you may have seen trailers for that relatively new at this point campy horror movie about Winnie the Pooh. That was possible because Winnie the Pooh was first published in 1926. So that means that it is now no longer protected by copyright law, and the story could be freely shared, changed, depending on your opinion, ruined by others. But that's allowed, and that's part of how we grow culture and the arts. So look at publication dates for the items that you are using, particularly, as I said, if you're planning to use it in a class, and publishing it online for other students to share and download themselves. It can be a bit more complicated than this at times, especially we're talking about Southeast Asian materials here, so questions of international copyright law can come into play. So I don't want to oversimplify, but generally, if something is published in or before 1927, you're in the clear to reuse that item. When you do share it, always provide a full citation of the item, a link to the item record in that digital library, any copyright information that you might have. If you have any questions, or you're not sure about the copyright status of an item, just ask a librarian. Again, we're here to answer your questions. It is never a bother or an annoyance. And I've shared a link on this slide to a LibGuide from Cornell that has a lot more detail and information about copyright. So if you want to learn more or try to figure out the status of an item yourself, this is a really great resource to help you navigate that process. So thank you, everyone. I'll just leave you with this last thought. Working with archival records can be an emotional experience, particularly in Southeast Asian studies. You might encounter materials that contain traces of oppression or trauma or violence. And you might find dehumanizing content. So it's important for us to remember that these archives are so vitally important in understanding history, and they are so incredibly useful in our research and our education. It's our job as researchers and patrons of the archives to humanize the subject of these records while we use them. But at the same time, make sure you give yourself any space that you need to feel the things that may come up when you encounter these intimate stories. So my contact information is on this slide. Please do reach out if you have any questions about what we've talked about today, or digital projects or tools that you might be doing for other things in or outside of CIASE. I am happy to help. I'm happy to go ahead and answer any questions now if you have any.